Hey everybody, welcome back to my Azure Networking Basics Lab series. Today we're going to be doing lab number 4, which is going to involve virtual network gateways. We'll be exploring how to connect two different VNets using a VPN gateway. Connecting VNets using a VPN gateway will allow us to establish secure and encrypted communication between two different VNets. So in essence, they'd be able to send data back and forth as though they were on the same network. In this lab, we'll start by creating two different VNets, and then within each VNet, we're going to create a VPN gateway. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at the different SKUs that are available for VPN Gateway so we make sure that we're picking the right type of device for our specific scenario. This video is perfect for folks who want to figure out how to establish a VPN connection between VNets or just want to deepen their understanding about different types of Azure VPN Gateways and virtual network gateways. So go grab a notepad, open up Google Notes, a Word document, whatever. So you can take some notes as we move along through this. And yeah, we're going to jump into having some Azure VPN fun. So we're going to jump in here to a new module. The previous 3 labs that we did were under this Introduction to Azure Virtual Networks. If you need the link for all of these different modules and labs, it's going to be in the video description. So we're going to be talking a little bit about hybrid networking, and really that's focused in this module on VPNs. So site-to-site VPNs, user-based VPNs, which are also known as point-to-site VPNs, and then also connecting VNet to VNets using VPNs. So just a little bit of background, high level, before we actually jump into lab itself. Within Azure, when it comes to making these types of different connections, we normally spin up what's called a virtual network gateway. And there's a few different flavors that you can do with that, whether it's going to be a VPN-based gateway or a ExpressRoute gateway. We haven't really gone into what ExpressRoute is, but just super, super high level. It's when you have circuits that connect your data center directly into the Azure cloud. That's going to be completely private, where using VPNs is going to be using encryption to go over the internet. When it comes to planning for a VPN gateway, there's a few things that we take into account: the type of architecture that we're going to be doing. As I mentioned, point to site, so that's user-based. Site to site, which is going to be something like your on-prem environment, your data center, connecting back into your Azure environment. Or we can also do something like VNet to VNet, which is actually what we're going to be doing in the lab today. As with everything in Azure, there is a bunch of different types of SKUs, and you really need to pay attention to these to figure out what type of device you need to get to be able to meet the requirements for the solution that you're doing. Depending upon whether or not you need to be doing site-to-site, point-to-site, the amount of bandwidth that you need to have, whether you need it to support BGP, whether you need it to support multi-availability zones. These are all things you need to take into account. The basic rule of thumb is you probably don't want to use the basic one because it's very, very limited to what you can do. They also have policy-based and route-based VPNs. Again, this is a very simple rule with this. You don't want to use the policy-based ones. The route-based is pretty much what everything does at this point, except for the basic VPN SKU. We're avoiding that because there's severe limitations on the amount of tunnels that you can have, the type of IPsec, or Internet Key Exchange that is supported. BGP isn't supported. It's very, very, very basic, hence the name. So we're going to completely avoid that and go with a route-based VPN. And here we can kind of see a little bit of a difference between these broken down. Policy-based only has it under basic. You can only do one site-to-site connection. Route-based basic VPN, you can only do 10 site-to-site connections, but there's other limitations that come with that and the type of VPN that is actually supported for that site-to-site. So it's just best practice to not even mess with that. Just go with a standard VPN and then look at the specifics that you need to meet the requirements when it comes to bandwidth, number of connections, things like that. In the lab, we're going to look at creating a VPN gateway. This is the VPN configuration that's required for the VPN device within our Azure environment. One of the interesting things with Azure is that when you do create these VPN gateways, it actually has to reside within what's called a gateway subnet. So you can't just put it in any subnet that you want. You actually need to create a separate subnet named a gateway subnet and put the resource into that. You can make the gateway subnet as small as a /29, But as we learned in the other Azure videos, a lot of those IPs get taken up very quickly for the network, the gateway, the two IP addresses, and then the broadcast address. So that really doesn't leave you with much left. Best practice is to go with a /27 or something bigger than that, especially if you start to put multiple types of devices in there. We mentioned the fact that we're using a VPN gateway if we want to throw some express route gateways in there as well, and some other particular types of things depending on how we need to scale out. It's just better to give yourself the space ahead of time. So we mentioned creating the VPN gateway. The other configuration that we'll need to create is what's called a local network gateway. This is just a representation of the device that sits on-prem. Once we have both of those two things configured, then we go in and we configure the on-premise VPN device, which we won't necessarily have to be doing in this case because we aren't doing on-prem. We're going to do a VNet to VNet configuration. Cool thing when you are using the on-prem type of situation, depending upon partnerships with different types of device manufacturers, Azure will actually give you a pre-configured configuration file that you can go and load into your remote device. There are some things that you need to modify with that, maybe the public IP address of your VPN gateway. And last thing I'm going to hit on this is it's good to know that there's a whole bunch of different types of high availability options. So we can have redundancy just within the VPN gateway itself. So by default, whenever you spin one of these up, you get an active device and a standby device that's kind of in a virtual cluster. You can do multiple devices on-prem connecting back into your Azure environment. You also could do, instead of active-passive for your VPN gateway cluster, you can have both of them be active-active. Then the one with the most availability is going to be if you have two VPN devices on-prem connected to two active devices within your Azure environment. Cool thing, we could do the same thing with high availability with VNet to VNet if we needed to, but we're just going to be kind of going basic today with just a single VNet to single VNet. So then that actually would be just one active VPN gateway to another active VPN gateway. When it comes to troubleshooting, there's a few different diagnostic logs that are worth knowing. The gateway diagnostic logs are going to be configuration events and changes. Tunnel diagnostic log is going to be looking for state changes for the tunnel. So connects, disconnects, things like that. Route diagnostics is going to help with static routes and BGP events. IKE is going to be good for the internet key exchange control messages and understanding those types of events on the gateway. And then the P2S diagnostic log is going to be good for your user-based VPNs. So you might be wondering, since we actually already covered VNet peering in the past, why would you want to use VPN Gateway to connect to VNets compared to just using VPN peering? Well, there are some differences with that. Obviously, the VPN peering is going to go over the Microsoft backbone, where the VPN traffic is going to go over the internet. One thing, though, depending upon the security requirements that you have, is that traffic going over the peering is unencrypted. So the VPN Gateway provides you a very good way of making sure that traffic between VNets is encrypted. This might make more sense depending upon the type of traffic that is, or if you are doing a connection between completely different organizations or accounts. Also, if there are certain types of laws or regulations that you're trying to follow along with. There are some other pros and cons that come with that. Obviously, going over the backbone with the peering, the speed is going to be much higher. There's going to be less latency. There's less hops involved because you're going through less devices. So the flip side of that is when it comes to doing the VPNs, it is worth understanding kind of the bottleneck that you have when it comes to the bandwidth of the VPN device itself. And here's kind of a good little breakdown of the differences between the VNet peering and VPN gateways. I'm going to put a link for this in the video description, so if you want to go a little bit more in depth with this to see the differences, then you can go and kind of dig into that. All right, so now moving into the lab, let's take a look at what we have going on here. So in this exercise, we're going to configure a virtual network gateway to connect to the core services VNet and the manufacturing VNet. Now, if you remember in our previous labs, we created these manually. We ended up destroying them. But if you also remember, we did some stuff with some PowerShell scripts before where we were able to spin stuff up. That's exactly what's going to happen in here. Through the rest of these labs, all of this basic stuff is going to be, we're going to use PowerShell scripts to spin them up. And then add in the specific configurations for the topics that we're covering. So we have some scripts over here. I'll put this link in the description as well. This is over on the GitHub page. Pretty much what we need to do is all 6 of these .json files, we need to download those and save those because we're going to be using them in this lab. If you don't remember how to go about doing that, if we click into one of these, then you just come here, hit raw, and then in whatever browser, and you can go to file save. Make sure that you do append a .json to the end of the file because it does need to be a .json file when we go to upload it via PowerShell. So what are we going to be doing? We're going to create the 2 VNets here, this core services and manufacturing VNet. Then we're going to create the test VM in the core services and a test VM in manufacturing VNet. They're going to have us connect to test the VMs to make sure that RDP doesn't work. We can do this or we cannot do this. The basics of how all this stuff works, especially if you're working in a clean environment that you're just spinning up, then we know that in order for 2 VNets to communicate with each other, they need to either be peered or you need to be doing what we're going to be doing in this lab, which is creating a VPN connection between them. So if you want to go through the process of RDPing in and trying to ping and stuff like that, you can do that. If you don't, that's cool too. So once we verify that there's no connectivity there, we're going to create a gateway in the core services VNet. And then we're going to create a gateway in the manufacturing services VNet. Then once those are both done, we are going to do the configurations with those gateways to make that connection there. So core services to manufacturing and then manufacturing to core services. Going to make sure that the connection comes up and then we can test connectivity between the VMs. So the first step here, we're going to be creating the core services VNet and manufacturing VNet. So we're going to open up the portal. We're going to get into the PowerShell session with a Cloud Shell pane. And then we're going to upload both the Azure deploy.json file and the Azure deploy.parameters.json file into the home directory here. We also need to create our resource group. We can name this whatever we want to name it. Just make sure that you're consistent with that through here. As you see that it's kind of listing as a variable, so as long as you're just calling this the rest of the time in the lab, whatever you end up putting here will work fine. So let's just take a real quick look at what's in these JSON files. So in the Azure deploy, they're creating the 3 different VNets that we had before and putting it in East US. They have IP addresses and prefixes /26s established with that. As I mentioned before, we need to have a gateway subnet. This is going to be configured as well within the appropriate VNets. So under core services VNet, there's going to be a gateway subnet. There's a few other subnets, shared services, database, public web service. Then under the manufacturing VNet, same thing, some sensor subnets. Then under the research, there's another subnet there. And here we're just getting into some of the specifics about creating the subnets. Cool. All right, so I already downloaded these. Let's go over into the Cloud Shell and upload this. So we're going to copy this over. We can name it whatever we want to name it. I'm going to go CyberInsight Lab. And then we're going to make sure that we are in the right location with that resource group. Cool, so we did that. And here we're going to upload the Azure deploy.json file and the Azure deploy parameters file. So let's go upload those first, and then we can use that command. Remember to upload files. You're just going to go to this icon here that has a document with the up and down arrows. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll meet you back here in a second. So both of those should be done. If we do an ls in here, then we do end up seeing those in there. We see some other ones from some of my previous labs, but we're kind of good to go with all of that. Now we should be able to come, copy and paste this line here, and this will deploy those resources using the JSON files that we have. All right, so we see that this was successful. We have these different VNets have now been deployed. We can go back if we want to see resource groups and kind of see what we have going on. CyberInsight Lab. If we go into there, then we now see these different VNets, and we see that they're kind of in different regions. If we click into these, we can see there's a bunch of different subnets underneath those, and that's kind of the same across everything there. So let's move on to the next step and see what we're doing. So we're going to create the core services test VM. Again, this is going to be the same thing, except this time we're uploading these two JSON files. So let's just go see what that is real quick. So core services, it's going to be doing this virtual machine. It's going to be having a admin account associated with that. It's talking about the subnet that it's going into, the type of server that we're getting, a Windows Server 2019, the particular network interfaces, what those are going to be associated with. It's going to have a security group that's going to allow RDP, so 3389, inbound from anywhere, and then a public IP address, a basic one, but it's going to be dynamic. Okay. And then if we look at the parameters, then we'll kind of see the name, the nickname, the particular VM size that we're doing, and then the username and password. Again, you can change these to whatever you want to do if you wanted to change it to something more specific. And also remember that with the security groups, it looks like you probably will have open internet access to 3389 on that server. So if you wanted to modify that or just make sure that you delete everything in this lab as soon as you're done with it. So we're going to copy this. Okay, now let's go back over in here and upload those other two files. I'll be right back. All right, so that should be done. We can go ahead and we can copy and paste this command over here. It's going to deploy the core services, JSON files. All right, so that is all done for that deployment in the core services. VNet, I'm going to go ahead and run through the same exact thing for the database, or not the database, manufacturing test VM. It's going to be the same thing, just we're using different JSON files. So I don't think I need to show you that. You can go ahead and do that too, and then I'll meet you back once we're done with that. I ran into an error message here. I think we ran into this in our last lab too. I think the size of the particular VM is different. We're just going to go back to find the particular size that was used in the core services file. So I think if we go and look at this real quick, core services parameters, it's a DS1_v2. And I bet you this one under here is going to be different. Yeah, DS1 AS v5. So just take that other value, that DS1 v2, and swap this out in the parameters file for the manufacturing VNet. So just swap it out for this right here and then re-upload your file. All right, so that finished up here. we're able to see that the VM was created and the NIC configuration, all that should be good. So if we actually go, we can just click into one of these and look at the resources, topology. Yeah, we can actually see, let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit better. Yeah, we can actually see the NIC and the VM and the network security group and the IP address all associated with that. Okay, so now that we have both the VMs up, if you want to go ahead and attempt to do some testing with RDP between the two different VMs, you can go ahead and do that. I already know that that's not going to work, so I'm just going to skip ahead down to the next step from here, and that's going to be creating the VNet gateways. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and just type in Virtual Network Gateway up in the search. And we're going to go over here and click on Create. All right, so we're going to go subscription, Azure Subscription 1. We select the core services VNet. Already has a subnet or a gateway subnet that was already created, so that's already there. Let's go ahead and put the name in here that we need. Let's see. So we're going to go core services VNet gateway. We're already in East US because that's what we need to get the core services VNet to pop up. This is going to be a VPN gateway, not an express route gateway. As mentioned before, VPN type. Remember I mentioned we don't want to use a policy-based. Route-based is what you want to use going forward. And these are all the different SKUs. I think we were just going to go with VPN Gateway 1. Let's just double check that that is what we're doing. Yes. And that was the core services VNet and the gateway. Public IP address, we're going to go create new. We're going to give it this IP address. I want the public IP address SKU to be basic. And let's see, enable active mode. Nope, we're just going to have one be active, and then we're going to configure BGP. We're going to have that disabled. I don't think it will let us actually set the public SKU to basic, so it's going to force us to standard, which is fine and probably the better choice anyway. We're going to set that to disabled. And go ahead, review and create. Validation pass, we'll go ahead and hit create. And deployment, here we go. We see the deployment is in progress, and we'll just kind of wait for this stuff to finish up. And I'll catch you here in a minute. Now, it's worth pointing out that this could take a bit of time, could take 30 minutes or so. So what we're actually going to do while this deployment is in progress, we're going to head over and create the other VPN gateway that we need to do that is in the other VNet. So if we go back over here, you see the manufacturing VNet gateway. We're going to go through the same process, but use the information that is in here. So while this is doing this, we can go Virtual Network Gateway. So this one's now popped up in here, but we're going to go create. And let's see where this one is going to be. This one is West Europe, and its manufacturing VNet is going to be the one that we're looking for. There we go, manufacturing VNet. So that 10.30, it's a /27. And we're gonna go like this. Okay. Let's see the rest of this that we need to go. Manufacturing VNet gateway, route-based, VPN Gateway 1. And we're going to do similar things as what we did in the other one. Let's drop that there. VPN Gateway, route-based. Let's get rid of that one, go with that. Generation 1, manufacturing VNet, subnet, create new one. I'm going to go drop this in here. Enable active mode. We're going to disable that. So we're only using one IP address. Okay. We can go review and create. That passed a validation. We can go ahead and hit create on that as well. And while that is doing that, we can maybe go back and check on the other one. We see that we have multiple deployments in progress. It's always good to check your notifications up at the top right. And we see that both of these are populated in here. If we go back to the deployment in progress, we can see stuff going on. So IP was created, core services VNet gateways created, but deployment is still in progress. So we're going to let this spin for a little bit, and then I'll come back when both of them are done. All right, so now it looks like we have both of these completed. If we go in here, we see they are all here. It doesn't say update anymore. We see that that is the same here for this manufacturing one. So let's move on to the next step. And that is we're going to actually create the connections for these VPNs. So we're going to go under the Virtual Network Gateway. We go into the Core Services VNet Gateway, and we're going to go Connections and hit Add. Connections, Add. And connection type, we see a few different options here. Site to site, Express Route, VNet. We're going to go VNet VNet. We're going to go Core Services Gateway to Manufacturing Gateway. So first, Virtual Network Gateway is what we're selecting there. Second Virtual Network Gateway is going to be the one that we are connecting to here. So the Manufacturing VNet Gateway. Okay. And then a pre-shared key, you can make that be whatever it is that you want it to be. Here we're just going to go really simple, ABC123. Definitely don't use that in a real environment, but for this, and we're going to delete it, it doesn't really matter. Let's see. Checking this option, use Azure private IP address. Check this option allows you to use the Azure private IPs to establish an IPsec VPN connection. Support for private IPs must be set on the VPN gateway for this option to work. It is only supported on availability zone SKUs, which we didn't select. We're not going to enable BGP. We're just going to be using static routes. And then we're going to make sure that we're using IKE version 2. And location, US East. Okay. So it says creating connection. We'll wait for that to go through. And we see that here pop up once I hit refresh, and it's updating. While that's doing that, we can create the other connection here, the manufacturer VNet to core services VNet. Same thing, but we're doing it on the other VPN gateway. We'll go under manufacturing VNet gateway. And we see that that is there. We're going to add another connection. And this time still VNet to VNet, manufacturing VNet gateway. Here we're going to choose core services VNet gateway, ABC123. Keep all those. This location is going to be in West Europe because that's where that VPN gateway is. We should be able to hit OK. And now we see that updating. That status is unknown. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait for these connections here to come up in the search resources where we're already at. Wait until both status of both connections are connected. May need to refresh the screen for that. All right, so now we see that this is status connected here under this connection. And then same here. Now, I was waiting for about 20 minutes or so, maybe 15 minutes. And didn't see this come up. So what I decided to do was actually follow the next steps that they had in here, which was connecting into the manufacturing test VM, opening PowerShell, and using this testnet connection to attempt to connect from the manufacturing test VM to the core services VM over 3389, which is RDP. It's not actually creating an RDP session, but it's trying to send the traffic over that port. If you remember when we were looking at the configurations, 3389 was opened up in the NSGs in the network security group. So that should be good. I did that. And let's see if I bring this up here so you can see what this looks like. I did that, ran that command. I opened up PowerShell, ran that command, and you see that it came up as true. So it meant that that VPN connection was up and was working fine. And once I did that and went back and looked at the status within the Azure portal, and I saw that it was connected. So you may or may not have to do that, kind of send some traffic across the VPN to get that to show as connected. Sometimes, I mean, that's something that I'm familiar with from using other types of VPN devices. A lot of times it won't actually show that there's a connection there until you send traffic over that tunnel. So if you do try this and you're kind of waiting for the connection status to show connected and it's not, then give this a try. You can just RDP into the box. So really could be either one, but the commands that they have here in the lab are from doing it from the manufacturing VM to the core services VM. So give that a try. So if we go back and look at this, and if you're wondering how to actually RDP into that, if you just have an RDP client, then that will work for you. The specifics, that will help you with that. If you go and you find the VM of the one that you want to go into, let me move back. It will be a little bit easier for you to see this. Go virtual machine. We'll go connect. They have a few different options. Since this is Windows, we want RDP. And then it will give you this RDP file you can download that will have this information, and then you can just import that into your RDP client. Remember to get the username and password to be able to get in that, which if you remember, it's going to be in the parameters file for the particular VM. So in this case, test user, and then this particular password. So looking at all this, we see it's all connected. We're going to want to make sure that we tear all this down just because we don't want to keep it up and incur any additional costs. While we're kind of talking about that, let's take a look at what those costs would be hypothetically for VPN gateways. So here is a pricing page for VPN gateways. Depending on the type of gateway that you go with, there's obviously a different price. So depending on how long you have it up for, different prices kind of go along with that. So in this case, we're using VPN Gateway 1, so it's like 20 cents an hour. Not too bad, but if you forget about it, and remember we're doing 2 of them, that could add up over a month or so. And then you also have inbound and outbound data transfer prices that you need to be aware of. So again, not too bad. And what we're doing, we're not really sending much traffic back and forth. So, all right, so now that we did that, then we can go ahead and we can actually get rid of everything here. Let me go see if I can find a command that will get rid of that for us. So I just moved over to one of the other labs here, but pretty much we just want to kill the resource group. So I want to remember to place the correct name of the resource group that we're going to get rid of. So in this case, for me, it's going to be CyberInsight Lab. I'm just going to copy this. We'll bring up the Cloud Shell. And this is going to be running. This is going to take a little bit of time to go ahead and delete everything there. So we're not going to sit here and wait for that. You can actually go, and if you go back to the main area where the resources are, resource groups, and go under the particular resource group, you can kind of start to watch as these things start to disappear, and you can just keep hitting refresh until you make sure that everything is deleted. All right, so that was our VPN Gateway Lab. Pretty cool. We connected 2 different VNets. We ended up spinning up a whole bunch of different VNets, a few different hosts, then ended up building out individual VPN gateways in each of those environments. We took a look at the different SKUs and the different requirements that we want to look at when trying to size those properly and configure those in the correct manner. We ended up, after spinning those up, ending up creating the connections between those, And once that was good to go, then we sent some traffic back and forth to make sure that we had connectivity between the different VNets. Remember, this is probably not the solution that you're going to want to use with connecting different VNets. As we saw before, really the peering is really the way to go in most cases. But if you do need to add another layer of security to communication going back and forth between different VNets, and you don't want to rely on encryption at the application level, then this is a pretty good way to do it. So if you have any questions or comments, throw those down below. I'll hit those up. And yeah, check in soon. Gonna have a whole bunch more Azure Labs coming up. So these definitely help me out. I don't know if you caught in my last live stream, but following these and doing some stuff with some other resources, I was able to pass my AZ 700, which is the Azure Network Engineer Associate exam. So hopefully these are helpful to you. Go get at it, and we'll talk soon. All right.